Hello everybody, how's it going today? Glowplasma 231 here, back in to talk about World Trigger, chapter number 248. This chapter is titled Rokuro Wakamura Part 4. And quickly, before we get into this video, let me just quickly say, guys, I am so very sorry. It may or may not be April 1st whenever I'm recording this video. Notice it's not an April Fool's joke. I am legitimately recording this video to be put out decently soon, but of course, chapter number 248 of World Trigger is our singular chapter of the month for December of 2023. Yes, you heard me right. This chapter came out at the beginning of December, and we are currently sitting at pretty much the beginning of April. So it has been 4 months since this chapter came out, and also it's been 3 months since I last put out a World Trigger video, since I put out the World Trigger Christmas special for Christmas of 2024. We had the 246 and 247 reviews that day, being that those chapters came out at the same time. But either way, I'm really sorry about that, guys. It's just World Trigger is always one of the hardest videos to make because sometimes these chapters are incredibly long. And today we have a 35-page chapter, if I'm not mistaken. Let me scroll way to the end. Yes, we have a 35-page chapter. And a good portion of this is hey, we're checking up what's going on with, of course, Wakamura Squad after everything that's been happening with them and Wakamura and Hyuse's brutal takedown and all of that other various stuff. And then we have a good section of 8 pages or so where we are strictly focusing on all of the A rankers, and this video would have probably been recorded about an hour ago if I didn't have to go through and write down the names of all of the A rankers that we see in this chapter on a piece of paper so I can quickly reference and be oh yeah, that person, well, I say this, the first name I've written down is Kazuma. I know who Kazuma is. He was one of the biggest characters in the beginning of it. Whoa, Osamu actually beat Kazuma? Yeah, so it was after 40 tries or whatever that whole thing was. But hey, either way, do you guys remember who Raizo Terashima is? He shows up in this chapter. He is the chief engineer. He's one of the border management guys. We all always see him hanging around Director Kinuda, if I'm not mistaken, but he shows up hanging out with Tokiadia in this chapter, right? But I was who is this guy? I actually should probably know his name and just not butcher it. So went through, wrote down all of these various A rankers names because hey, I barely know B rank, and I really only know B rank because of this arc, really. And of course, sitting beside me, I also have my World Trigger Border Briefing File data book, and also the printout on the piece of paper of the World Trigger Volume 24 intro sequence. I've had this thing printed out for a long time. It pretty much says hey, this is everybody, Utagawa Squad 1, OG Squad 2, Kakizaki Squad 3, all of that various stuff. So no, okay, here's the character images and what they look like, pretty much, right? But yeah, with all that out of the way, really, this is a very awesome chapter of World Trigger, really wrapping up the whole, hey, Wakamura has been having his brutal takedown for, the past 3 or not 4 chapters. The idea really started 4 chapters ago, whenever the whole thing of, Wakamura's hey, what does Osamu have that I don't? And then from there, the past 3 chapters have really been about Hyuse pretty much breaking down into what Wakamura is thinking, breaking through all of his various psyches and all of that. And yeah, I mean, of course, this chapter is titled Rokuro Wakamura Part 4. So we end off a little bit of this arc here and really get started into the next day of the battle simulations and all of the various stuff going on here in the sealed environment phase, right? But I think I just sort of mentioned it, what happened last time on World Trigger, and like I said, it was really these whole chapters about Hyuse fully breaking down Wakamura and being hey, what did you learn out of all of your training with Inukai, right? Oh, well, you really learned nothing at all? Well, that's sort of your demerit, pretty much, right? Either way, the whole idea is he was saying, hey, Wakamura, I know no matter what, you can be capable of doing things that you weren't once capable of doing, right? Riding a bike, eating with chopsticks, doing any one of these things. You were born into this world not knowing how to do this, but through sheer work and perseverance and through sheer raw effort, you learned how to, right? And that was the whole idea. We got these really beautiful metaphors of Wakamura building up bricks, subdividing his goals until he's eventually able to reach higher and higher ranks. And the final scene of we saw of last chapters, of course, Wakamura, and it has been a little while, so what is this other guy's name? Hanizaki. I don't know why I forgot that. We focus on these guys too much for me not to know. Hanizaki, Sasamori, Wakamura, Hisato, or no, not, Hasoi, and of course Hyuse in Wakamura Squad 11, right? But we see that both Wakamura and Hanizaki are going to bed in this moment, right? And that is really where we open up this chapter of World Triggers. We see that they're both laying in their respective beds. Both of them are very much just sitting up there. As Hanazaki's just like, hey, Rokuro, like, try not to let it get to you too much, you know? And Rokuro's very silent, like, we even see, like, his dialogue bubble has a question mark in it, and Rokuro's very just like, okay. As Hanazaki's like, hey, Hyuse's whole speech was, like, definitely impressive, but, like, it's not exactly like that approach will work out for everyone, you know what I'm saying? Like, hey, at the end of the day, both Inukai and Hyuse are basically telling you to pull up yourself by your bootstraps, yeah? And that's gotta be some tough advice to put into practice, like, I could only imagine, right? And Wakamura just is like, I mean, here's the thing, I don't necessarily feel that way, like, tell me this, Hanizaki, how does it work over if you and Arifune Squad? Does, like, Arifune himself instruct you? Of course, Hanizaki is in Arifune Squad. He sort of reflects, like, on my squad, like, well, let me just think about this. Like, hey, the older guys always give us training regimens on, like, a regular basis. Like, hey, we'll give you this sniper training 1 hour course, right? But then, like, I won't necessarily finish it in time, as we see a scene of Hanizaki walking up to Arifune being like, hey, Arifune, this one's a little tough, like, it took me 90 minutes to get through, right? And it's like, I was never going to be able to pull it off in an hour, so it may just be a bit too hard for me, right? As we see that Arifune comes over, grabs the notepad that had, like, the whole training course on it, right? And he says, like, okay, I see. We see that he simply scratches out the 1 and replaces it for a 2, as it's like, hey, it's now a 2-hour course, meaning that Hanizaki did the whole thing in the time allowed for him, right? And Arifune is like, hey, good work on this, and hey, good luck on the next one too, Hanizaki, right? As sitting here in the sealed environment double bedroom, Hanazaki's like, you know what? Maybe on second thought, maybe my captain seems to, like, half-ass a bunch of these things, right? And he's like, hey, anyway, I guess when you decide to take on the teaching role, it makes no sense to keep giving all those lessons until they stick, right? As Wakamura just is like, hey, well, actually, I think I've gotten a lot out of this. I mean, putting concrete techniques and knowledge aside, it's helped me realize some very fundamental stuff, and all that's left is for me to decide what to do. And Hanazaki's, like, very much just looking at Wakamura, just like, oh, interesting, right? It's like, hey, either way, I'm glad to hear that. I mean, like I said, I try not to dwell on it too much, right? Like, hey, you're doing a decent job as being this whole temp captain thing, so, like, but as he says this, Wakamura's like, hey, I actually was under the impression that you had some complaints about my leadership, Hanizaki. And Hanazaki's like, what, like complaints? Me, no. And he's like, oh, wait a second. Don't tell me to, like, you take it really personal. Like, oh, man, this blows, or this is a drag, or, like, all of that very stuff. Like, those are just practically my catchphrases, you know? Like, whenever I say, like, crud or man, this sucks, like, that's just me being me. Like, putting that stuff into words, like, helps me, like, settle down and lock in. I guess, like, I know I'm just making excuses. Like, God, I've really done it now. I've really screwed up, right? And Hanazaki's, like, having this mental breakdown here in a moment. Like, the smallest thing has set him off. I find it really funny. It just, like, shows you how mature Wakamura really is in compared to Hanazaki's. Like, Wakamura's had his entire life pretty much put into perspective, being broken down, built back up again. And this whole time, he's like, hey, I'm going to keep doing what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to get even better. I'm going to progress further in my life. Being very rational about all of this. And Hanazaki's just like, I'm a bumbling, like, I'm a failure, right? Actually, I already have the World Trigger wiki open. How old are these two? Let me go to characters. I need to scroll down to the B-rank squads. I also, like, I have never mentioned this here on the channel before, but man, is the World Trigger wiki, like, one of the best things I've ever discovered in my life. Like, I always use a bunch of wikis, but, like, as complex of a series the World Trigger is, it very much makes a lot of sense. Okay, looking at how old is this man? Okay, I am on Rokuro's page. It's his name. Visual statistics. Okay, there we go. Or Val statistics. Birthday, April 18th. He's 17 years old. Pretty cool right there. And let's just go down and find where Arifune Squad is. Control-Shift-G. Arifune. There's Arifune Squad. Let me find Hanizaki. There Hanizaki is. How old is Hanizaki? I guess he's like 16 probably. Yeah, he's 16 as of the current manga chapters. Apparently, he was 15 at the beginning of the series, and he's actually aged a year, so we know. But yeah, he's 16 and Rokuro's 17, so it makes a little bit of sense here of, like, how they're acting based on their age, right? All right, let me navigate back over to the chapter if I can. Computer, please. Yeah, going through all of that, Rokuro just says, like, hey, I mean, you're fine. I really didn't take anything personally, Hanizaki. Like, you're perfectly fine. And Hanazaki's like, man, I should just, like, crawl into a hole and just die. And Rokuro's like, hey, I said you're fine. Please don't dwell on it, okay? Sort of, like, having a little bit of a comedic moment to end off this very serious conversation, all things considered, right? We now cut outside of the room where both Hanizaki and Rokuro are sleeping, as we see outside both Hyuse and Sasamori are both sort of just sitting out there talking about all of this, right? It seems like Hisoi has already gone back to her operating room to do all of the various, like, note-taking and everything she has to do before she goes to bed tonight. And Hyuse is just like, hey, tomorrow, Sasamori, please do your best to make up for Rokuro's, or no, I'm sorry, he said, Sasamori, in the event that Rokuro remains despondent tomorrow, we'll be relying on you and Mayori. And is Mayori? Yeah, Mayori's Hisoi in this sense, right? Please do your best to make up for Rokuro's shortcomings in. And Sasamori's like, hey, I really think that he's going to be okay, but sure, I'll hear you out. And he's like, honestly, I had no idea that Rokuro was brooding about all of that various stuff, right? And Hyuse is just like, hey, it's understandable for sure for a captain unaccustomed to leadership, especially ones whose squad cannot escape last place. It's perfectly natural for him to panic about all of these various results, right? As you just see a little image of, like, Rokuro looking at his computer and being like, you know what, maybe the problem is that I'm a screw-up, right? Which, of course, we know isn't necessarily the case, because we know that he's trying to work to become better at all of this, right? Sasamori then just says, like, hey, Hyuse, I have to ask you, but why do you think Rokuro was chosen as a captain for this provisional exam, right? And he's like, hey, personally, I don't have any complaints about him taking on the role. Like, I think he's doing a great job, but there are definitely a good number of other qualified agents. As we see just a bunch of various faces here. I see Inukai, I see Arafune, I see Azuma, I see, oh gosh, that is Yuba. We see Kakizaki. Isn't Kakizaki one of the people? It may not be Kakizaki. Or no, it is Kakizaki, maybe. Maybe I just don't know my World Trigger characters enough, right? We just see we see even Akoma's face, Kitora's face, all right? The operator, I think her name is Kone, if I'm not mistaken. So we see there's a bunch of these various chibi faces here, right? And Sasamori is like, hey, what was the leadership team going in for all this while trying to choose Rokuro, right? And Hyuse is silent for a second before just going like, hey, thinking back on the events and conversations of today, I believe that Rokuro may have been chosen as a provisional future instructor, or as a potential future instructor, if I could use my words right? Sasamori's like, hey, an instructor, like, what are you talking about? Hyuse explains, like, hey, to start with, as an organization, Border has a disproportionate number of trainees among its agents. There aren't enough triggers to go around, for one, and the fact is that a good 80% of Border's fighters just sit unused. The current thinking seems to rely on the idea that capable individuals will naturally rise to the top on their own accord. However, one major challenge for the future of this organization is to see how many Tryon users can be dragged up from C rank where they're currently fumbling and failing. And Sasamori is like, okay, so they want instructors to help, like, boost the organization's fighting force. And Hyuse's like, yes, indeed. Kotora and the others, who rely on intuition, make for very poor instructors. And while Hisamu and his ilk are almost way too technique. On the other hand, as it stands, Rokuro represents the inexperienced demographic among these provisional captains. Given everything he currently lacks, if we can assume that Rokuro can drive himself past all of those walls and build his own experiences, he could eventually be a great service to other agents like himself that require smaller steps to make progress, right? As you just see an image of, like, all of the three people that he pointed out trying to teach people, and pretty much like Kotori's is like, hey, so this stupid stuff is, like, tripping you up, like, for real. Of course, she's not a great teacher. Osama's like, hey, just think of a bunch of these, like, cheese tactics and annoy the enemy into submission. Not everybody's going to be really understanding that. But we see Rokuro standing in front of class, and he's just like, hey, I see what's getting you down. Okay, how about let's try to break the problem into smaller problems and solve those one by one. Very much what, of course, Hyuse has been teaching him this entire time. Hyuse just continues saying, like, hey, if any significant percentage of those 400 C-rank agents can be cultivated into full agents, it would go a long way towards strengthening the organization. And with that approach in mind, potential instructors are a valuable resource. And Sasamore's like, oh, I mean, that's just awesome. And while we're bound to come across students who struggle in solo battles, some of them may find effective ways to contribute in the team setting. He's like, oh, just like Bakumo, right? Hyuse's like, yes, you are very much correct. Hyuse also just continues saying like, hey, again, this is like mere speculation on my part. Like, I cannot claim to know the leadership's true intent. This is truly my just best guess. And thoughtfully, they ought to focus on the present challenges rather than future ones. Like, hey, in any case, this selection exam represents a defining crossroads for Rokuro. Sasamori butts in and he's like, hey, I have to say, Hyuse, you kind of seem like detached at a glance, but when it comes to your squad mates, you really put some real thought into the matter. As Hyuse just says like, yes, of course. I too seek to join the impending away mission. It's only natural that I devote every effort to that end. And Sasamori is like, I forgot about this aspect of you, but it really does make sense, right? And at this point, we cut over to some other people going around, but honestly, this is a very nice little introspection that Hyuse has here of like, hey, the whole idea of, I think we sort of got ideas of this before. Again, the away mission test is very long and complex, so it's like, I'm pretty sure we've had ideas in the past about like, hey, making not only the future management for Border and like on top of like cultivating people who know how to use triggers and all that our various stuff, getting our combatants ready, we need to figure out who's going to be in the management for the future generation. It also makes sense to get instructors for the future generation too, and it really seems like if Rokuro can overcome all this and become a great agent, then one day he can truly teach a bunch of others in a way that he needed to be taught himself. Really extremely nice moment here, right? Well, at this point, we see this is the sealed environment phase, end of day 5. We have 2 more left until the next start of this series begins, right? Well, we open up the next morning with the sealed environment day, the sealed environment phase, day 6, as we cut to around to all of the various A rankers checking in on what happened last time, being like, oh man, what's going on, right? As the first 2 we see Ken Tasomi and Yukimaru Ichijo sitting here, right? And we see Satomi's like, oh, would you look at that? Like, there's a whole mountain of comments about Hyuse and Rokuro, like, what's going on? And Yukimaru just says like, yeah, I mean, I guess something must have happened yesterday, right? As they're pretty much watching back all of the tapes of like him being like, hey, what does Mikumo got that I don't? And Satomi's just like, man, it seems like one really intense convo, you know what I'm saying? And Yukimaru's like, hey, I don't know much about what Mikumo was up during the rank wars. Like, it just seems like very interesting, all things considered, right? We hear more of the video being played all around the various A rankers, as we just see like narrators say like, hey, well, you spend time searching for that special something, your competition is steadily progressing forward via standard efforts. We see Karin Yu Tisuka and Haruka Ayatsuji. Karin and Haruka, right? As we just see two of them like, man, like he really let him have it. Like, I think Haruka's the one that says like, yeah, Hyuse hits a nail on the head. Like, that's a bit ouch, you know what I'm talking about, right? We then get to Amo over here in this moment, and Amo's just like, hey, I mean, Hyuse really knows what he's talking about. Rokuro's fundamentals are totally lacking in a bunch of major ways, right? And of course, we see that Jean is sitting right next to him, as Amo just continues saying like, hey, combat is all about outwitting and countering the opponent. You can't outwit your way out of a paper bag with basics in place, right? And Jean's just like, Amo, you were really harsh on poor old Wakamura, you know what I'm saying, right? As at this point, we cut over to see where Arashiyama and Toichiro Momozono are sitting. I have never seen this. I don't even know if I've ever talked about this character of Toichiro before, but he's certainly here, right? As we cut over to them, as we start to look at all of the various evaluations of Hyuse of the prior day that were all given during the night shift, right? As we see the first two, is we see that Kazuma is sitting there, and he's just like, hey, he gives... what is this? Hyuse a +1 thing, like, hey, he's giving really good concrete tips, but like, hey, I even think he could have been a little bit harsher even, right? We even see what Shun thinks. He's like, man, like, I was like, whoa, that's really badass the entire time, right? As we see that Toichiro's just like, even harsher? Like, do you think he would have been able to handle that? As Arashiyama just is like, come on, you know how Kazuma is, right? The next two we see that Kako ends up giving a -1 to Hyuse, saying like, hey, he basically handed Wakamura the answer, which particularly isn't to Wakamura's benefit, right? Toma then pipes in saying like, hey, still he had to take a different approach in Inukai, or what else was even really the point, right? We didn't see that what Maki thinks about all of this, giving a +1 to Hyuse, also saying like, hey, now it's all up to Wakamura himself. It's a little unclear how effective this lecture will be, but it seemed incredibly sincere. We all see that Kaho just is like, hey, the lesson was made easier to understand via examples, hypotheticals, and diagrams. And I really like how Kako is looking at this, pretty much being like, hey guys, he gave just a lot of good examples and diagrams, right? We cut back over to Kin and Yukimaru, and Satomi's just, or Kin Satomi, and Satomi's like, hey, I mean, it really looks like Hyuse got a lot of kudos for all this various stuff, right? As Yukimaru, who looks like he's got his mouth full, is just saying like, his explanation was very nice and clear. Come on, like, don't talk for your mouth full. Like, Yukimaru, you can be doing better, you know? We then see that Anne Kobayakawa says like, hey, despite being a bit harsh, I sense actual thoughtness and consideration, giving Hyuse a +1. We see that Shinji Fukushima, of course, the one trapper we know, says like, gives Hyuse a -1, saying like, hey, putting him all in full blast from the younger agents, I really don't know if that's being very considerate, right? And On comes right back just saying like, hey, Wakamura himself was asking for advice, so I don't think Agent Hyuse was out of line here, right? We cut back into the room with Toichiro and Arashiyama, and Toichiro just says like, yeah, I mean, I honestly have to agree with Fukushima on this one. Like, if I were Wakamura, I would have never recovered from this beating, right? Which, I don't know, I really fall in line more of Kobayakawa here, because like, Hyuse gave it to Wakamura after Wakamura asked it for him, right? It's not like Wakamura just was like dealing through his normal day and Hyuse is like, hey, I'm going to teach you everything that's wrong about you. Like, that's just not how it works. So I very much fall more in line with Kobayakawa's thoughts here myself, right? And Arashiyama just is like, hey, but don't you think that Hyuse must have faith that Wakamura can pick himself back up after all of this, right? We then see a few 2-pointers coming in, as we see that both Futaba and Satomi both give, do we have 2 Satomis in this series? I don't know if I ever realized this, right? We have Kin Satomi, and then let me go back over to the World Trigger data profiles. I think his name is Cosma Satomi, which is like, that's not great for character naming conventions. Let me pull up the character list on the wiki again. Let me back out characters, and we're going to go into the search bar. We're going to search up Satomi. Yes, Cosma Satomi, right? The #1 gunner out of Kusakabe Squad. But we see that both him and Futaba Kuroe both give 2 +1s to Hyuse, as we pretty much see they're both just like, hey, just really did some good things here. The bicycle metaphor was a very good choice, right? And then we see that Ryuji Saeki actually ends up giving a -1 to Hyuse, pretty much saying like, hey, his talk really didn't strike a chord for me, right? We then see that Miwa and Yonea are sitting in a room reading over all of these things, as Yonea's like, hey, he didn't strike a chord for Saeki? Like, that's just absolutely hilarious, right? As Yonea just says like, hey, that sort of lecture would never work on him to begin with, right? As Yonea's just like saying like, I mean, now we've seen how Hyuse was evaluated more or less, so now let's go and look at Wakamura, right? As we actually see, the first one is none other than Saeki's again, as we see that he gives a +1 to Rokuro, saying like, hey, is Rokuro really that incapable? Like, I really think he's dwelling on it way too much, right? Kusakabe of Kusakabe Squad then pipes in with a -1, saying like, hey, he's not that great in team battles, and Agent Hyuse was correct on almost every single count. Maki comes in for another -2, just saying like, hey, he's way too weak-willed, too intimate with himself. It seems like the type to ask others for advice, and count that as simply making effort, right? When we see that Toichiro's just like, man, Maki is brutal, like, how can she say this? As Arashiyama's just like, I mean, she just finds the right angle to eviscerate someone. Saeki gives another +1, just saying like, hey, it gives some real initiative to go to others for advice, right? And him and Maki just had this massive back and forth, as Maki gives -2, just saying like, hey, not only did he waste others' time, but none of the lessons even stuck. More demerits for that, right? And Saeki gives a +2 to pretty much even out Maki's -2, saying like, hey, we've yet to see if this particular advice is wasted on him or not. Let's just keep an eye on Rokuro. And eventually Kaho comes back in saying like, hey, here's another +1. Hopefully all of the advice and lessons he received at this point will bear fruit in the future. I hope he makes good use on all of it, right? As we see that Satomi and Yukimaru are both sitting here reading all of this stuff, as Satomi's like, oh man, Kaho is like such a sweetheart, right? And Yukimaru just is like, hey, for some people, it can take a while to realize the value of advice they've gotten, right? We then cut over to another image as we see that Toru Narasaka from, I think he's from Kazuma Squad if I'm not mistaken, or Arashiyama Squad. He's from either, I think he's actually from Arashiyama. You know what, let me just go over as normal to the wiki to see what squad he's actually from. Let me scroll down. Yes, it does look like he is from, or no, he's from Miwa Squad. Yes, that is the squad that Narasaka is on. As we see that Narasaka and Katagiri are both sitting with each other. And Narasaka just is like, hey, I mean, Seki's unfounding optimism is honestly a little amusing, right? As Katagiri just is like, hey, Satomi actually crashed into a wall of his own in the past, right? Which likely informs his empathy for Wakamura. We then see that Kazuma and Toma both give a -1 to Wakamura also. Both of them pretty much just saying like, hey, it's too soon to declare that I have what it takes or I don't. Any given person is capable of so many things. Toma says like, hey, I don't want to hear all of this whining until the guy has done and tried every single thing that he can, right? Kako also gives a -1 saying like, hey, yes, it's tragic if genuine effort leads to failure, but it sounds like he's not even willing to try without a guarantee of some imagined payoff, right? We see that Karin and Haruka are both discussing this, as Karin just says like, I mean, Kako's comment particularly made me gasp a little bit, right? And Haruka's like, I mean, yeah, life is definitely tough when you start searching for foolproof paths to success. Kuroe gives a -2, pretty much saying like, hey, some people aren't just cut out for competition, and that just might be the case for this guy, right? As we see that Satomi, or Kazuma Satomi, says like, hey, cut it out, you're tearing my poor Rokuro's heart to pieces. My heart too, for that matter, which doesn't really seem like it's valid criticism, more just like, you guys are giving him too many minuses, I want to give him a few pluses, right? We then see that Hayato Uno just comes in and says like, hey, this is where the true challenge begins for Wakamura. I'm looking forward to him making a comeback, giving him a +1. And then we see that Michael Cronin even butts in, giving another +1 to Rokuro, just saying like, hey, advice is worth nothing until it's put into practice. I'm also hoping for noteworthy results. As I alluded to earlier in this video, now is where we finally see Raizo, Terashima, and Tokiada sitting together. As we see Raizo's just like, man, like, a lot of all these people are really rooting for him, aren't they, right? As Tokiada's like, I mean, I'm honestly on team Rokuro too. And Raizo's like, I mean, what advice would you give Rokuro, Toki? And Tokiada is like, I mean, let me think about that. I mean, it is a really tough question. I mean, my parents raised me to focus less on the goal itself and more on my best score. As Tokiada just is like, I mean, hey, think about it this way. Well, the goal is like the dream that you are chasing. It's about the person who you want to become eventually. The big end goal exists. You can choose your path forward in any direction, but it's not like you have to get there. It's not the goal or bust. Heck, your goal can even change along the way. There could be any number of different routes on the way to your goal. The real question is, how close to the goal did you get from your starting point of origin? And how far can you progress by your own willpower? Looking forward to all of that is the spice of life. As we get these really interesting visuals of Tokiada pretty much going on a backpacking journey, sort of starting off at the bottom of a mountain and having to work his way to climb all the way up to the top. Of like, hey, this is how life works. We all start on the bottom and we're all trying to carve our way up to our pinnacle of the best person we can be. And we see a few of these images of like Tokiada going down different paths, being like, hey, I think this would be the more direct way, but I actually want to go this way because I feel better myself in the end. And eventually you just look back upon it and say like, man, even though I'm not at the peak of this mountain yet, I still have come a very far way to begin with, right? Which is like a really nice little message here, right? Raizo then just says like, hey, I mean, so what you're talking about is like hints the whole best score thing. Like, I get it. It's really an interesting approach and a good way to think about it, right? And like, hey, I suppose this was a life lesson your parents learned for themselves. And Toki is like, actually, no, not really. After the first big attack by all of the neighbors, I sort of fell into a slump where I really couldn't bring myself to care. And I suspect they didn't want me to think that if my goal were out of reach, then I might as well give up. As we just see an image of Tokiada just like standing here looking at all of the barbed wire, or through all of the barbed wire to all of the destruction that the first neighbor attack really wrought on Mikado City. And it's honestly just like a really somber moment as we just see the world destroyed in front of this young boy. And it's just like, man, like, so hard, right? As either way, Raizo's like, all right, I mean, you're totally right. Good point. I mean, hey, I think you should offer Rokuro that lesson. And Tokiadia just is like, hey, I'd be happy to if he ever comes to me for advice. And honestly, I really just like what Raizo and Tokiadia talk about. It's a really nice little image, right? As we see the final one of the evaluations for Rokuro right now, as we see it is none other than Mai, of course, Frog Girl herself. As it just is like, hey, failure leads to panic, unease, pain, angst, embarrassment, etc. These things are no more than reactions that exist to keep us from repeating the same mistakes over and over, forever. Instead of brooding or avoiding the issue, it's best to embrace one's role and to let these setbacks be impetuses towards improvement. Rock on and live strong, Rokuro, right? As we see that this gets back to both Amo and Jean, and Amo's like, isn't Mai's comment, like, awfully philosophical in a way? And Jean's just like, I mean, of course it is. Even negative emotions can be put to use as fuel to spur on self-improvement. And as Jean says this, we get an image of Miwa. And let me just say, whenever I first read this chapter 4 months ago, I had the biggest smile on my face, sort of reading through all of this various stuff and getting here to the end and just seeing, yes, Miwa character development is a thing. It is so cool to see. I love Miwa's story coming through of him being this like very angsty guy who didn't really care, and just seeing how all of those negative emotions towards the neighbors can be used to fuel self-improvement. It's just a really, really nice thing to see, right? Well, at this point, we are done with all of the various A-rank agents looking at all of the evaluations of these characters, and we head over to none other than the provisional squads themselves, as we start off with Kodera's Squad 8, as we see that the first one to say something is Kitora, as she's just like, hey, so I've put some thought into all of this, into Suwa Squad. So I've put some thought into Suwa Squad trick from yesterday, right? And we see that, I'm definitely not stalling for time here, Miura just is like, hey, are you talking about like the way they had so many sniping units, you mean, right? As you get a little bit of understanding that Kitora then explains what her whole idea is, which is really the correct idea of like, hey, they skimped out on everything but ammo, right? As we see that Miura and, Okudera both see all this stuff happening, and we see that Miura's just like, oh man, that cost actually like works out just right. And he's like, oh, so it really seems like they did just skimp on ammo, right? And Okudera just says like, hey, I mean, I guess it really was a smart choice for us to stop at nothing to take down one of those units. I mean, we would have never had figured out without knowing the exact cost of those things, right? And Kodera just is like, hey, really great judgment there, Kitora, like, just keep it up, right? And she's like, oh, shucks. But she's like, hey, either way, the issue is, if any squads figured out this trick today, will we be able to repeat what Suwa Squad 7 did yesterday? And Kodera's like, I mean, sniping, I mean, we need a counter strategy for ranged attacks in general. And Okudera's like, hey, but like, what if we add a unit that specializes in like tanking a bunch of projectiles, right? Because like, think about it like this: combining offense and defense into a single unit is way too costly. And besides, we already saw some squads with 6 or more types of units, right? As we choose like the regular unit lineup, and then they have like a shield guy, pretty much, right? Mirror just is like, hey, I mean, wait a second. In all of those cases, was there a single creator controlling 2 different types of units at once? And Okudera's like, hey, either that or they distributed 1 copy of the 6th unit type to everyone, right? As we then see that Kodera is just sitting here, and eventually he almost has this eureka moment. He's like, oh, of course. And the squad's like, hey, like, what's up? Did you figure something out? And Kodera's like, I mean, yes, I mean, not really about yesterday, but it's what we discussed the day before. And Okudera's like, what were you talking about then? And Kodera just is like, hey, in the battle sims 2 days ago, Suwa Squad showed suspiciously good teamwork, and I now think that I know why. Suwa Squad must have been using blended mini-squads geared toward combos between units. And the entire squad sort of is like, oh, I mean, wait a second, right? As Okudera just is like, oh, so like, I get it. Whereas we like only had one person using their own avatars. Instead, they decided to group together the units to make inter-unit teamwork easier regardless of who's controlling them. Again, Kodera is hitting the nail right on the head of like, hey, instead of just like Okudera controlling all of Okudera's guys, he ends up controlling one of, one of Kodera's, one of Rakuda's, one of Okudera's, one of Miora's, pretty much like one of everybody's small units here on the squad, right? Amir's like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Like, that way you don't have to sync up your timing with other people. It's just your timing itself, right? And Kitora's like, I mean, thereby allowing them to activate combo skills precisely without wasted effort. Like, man, it still makes me a little upset, right? As we see that Rakuda just says, like, hey, I mean, that really explains how they performed so well to begin with, right? And she's like, hey, is that how Mizukami Squad made such good combo plays too? And Kitora just says, like, I mean, I think so. They very well might have been doing something similar, right? And just as, like, I mean, in hindsight, perhaps the presence of all those backup units was a hint about the strategy from the management, right? And Oku there sort of just looks at her and just says, like, man, this really late game realization like this is bound to frustrate an A ranker right, like her, right? As Oku there just, like, thinks, like, but all about Kotora, like, what does Kodera think about all of this stuff himself? As he looks over to Kodera, who's just, like, sitting there very peacefully. And Miura even just is like, hey, I mean, you almost look, like, pleased about all of this, Kodera, right? And Kodera's like, hey, I mean, I sort of am. I'm not usually one for the quick eureka moments like that, so even catching on after 2 days later is really a cause to celebrate. When I come upon the footprints of those ahead of me, it makes me feel like I'm making progress myself. Great sentiment, Kodera. I like you a bit more after this chapter, you know what I'm saying? But we sort of see, like, all the other rankers, or all the other squad mates just sort of, like, look around, like, yeah, I like that. Kitora eventually just says, like, hey, so will we adopt a new strategy for today's special simulations then? And Kitora's like, no, we won't. Retooling our units at this point would just put us in so much of a time crunch, so we'll just stick to the same general strategy while making use of the blended mini squads where possible. Sure, the special sims matter quite a bit, but our goal is to take first place overall. We then cut into the future a little bit as we see it is now 9 o'clock on day 6, so of course the labor hours now begin. We cut into Wakamura Squad 11, where we see that Hisoi is sort of like working on her computer, reading out some questions and having Hyuse answer them, and she's like, okay, so what we see here are circuit diagrams for sniping triggers, which means one of the following is the one for the Ibis, which one is it, Hyuse? And Hyuse's like, oh, I know, it's choice number 3. And Hisoi's like, you sure? Like, that was really quick, as Hyuse sort of, like, backs up his answer, saying, like, hey, the circuit shown in choice 3 allows one to modulate the power input, so it's very obvious at a glance, right? He's like, all right, what's the next one? Hisoi reads up the next one. It just says, like, hey, when using Whirlwind as a designated option for Kogetsu, where's the connection point for the option trigger, right? Before she can really finish the rest of the question, Hyuse just says, like, oh, it's choice 1. And she's like, how do you know all of this, right? But eventually she just says, like, hey, I'm honestly very wary about all of these being counted as my points. Like, maybe we're better off using your laptop, Hyuse. And Hyuse is just like, hey, I believe this approach is much faster, is it not, right? It's like, hey, besides which, my universal assignments remain unfinished, right? And so it's like, well, let's just get all of those done and dusted then, right? Hyuse is like, hey, just mind you, it's not a huge amount, all right? Either way, Wakamura then just says, like, hey, it looks like Hisoi and Hyuse have got the trigger-related questions covered, and he sort of looks over to both Hanizaki and Sasamori, saying, like, hey, you two need to decide on whose computer you submit them on. Meanwhile, the 3 of us can handle everything but the other trigger questions, right? And the other 2 are just like, hey, sounds good. Either way, Wakamura then just says, like, hey, focus on all of the assignments until 1 p.m. Then we'll dive into a strategy session about the special battle sims. Everybody is very much like, hey, sure thing, you got it, roger that, right? As we see one more image of all of the various A rankers as we cut back over to Kin Satomi and Yukimaru, as Satomi just says, like, man, like, it really looks like Rokuro's unit is not dwelling all of this. He's like, that's honestly very nice to see. And Yukimaru even says, like, yeah, I probably should give him a few points for all of that, right? As we then see, what are their names? Amo and Jean. I don't know why I forgot those. As Amo just says, like, hey, I seriously don't get this guy. Like, he's probably conflicted and indecisive deep down about all of this, right? And Jean just says, like, hey, come on. Like, let's just monitor him with a kind and watchful eye. Well, at this point, we cut to the final scene of the chapter, where we cut over to none other than Suwa Squad 7. As we see that Suwa's like, all right, guys, it's time to get started for today. And he's like, hey, Makumo. And Makumo's like, yeah, what do you want? And Suwa just says, like, hey, how much time do we need for the battle sim practice? And Osamu's like, hey, I really think like an hour, like half an hour should be good for all of this, right? And Oki's like, is that it, right? And Katori's like, hey, I mean, also, like, do you think that's enough? I'm sort of Oki on this one. And Osama's just like, hey, our strategy isn't all that too complex, and our units, our stats are already locked in, so really no reason just, like, keep going on this. As we see that Yui's just like, hey, so I guess what you're saying is that we have our ducks in a row, right? Katori then just is like, hey, so are you really that confident in all of this various stuff? And Osama's like, I guess not as confident as yesterday, but I really don't think we're in a bad spot by any means, right? And Suwa's like, all right, you heard the man. We'll work on delegated assignments until 2:30 then. Potentially just saying like, hey, the battle sims start at 3, so give them 30 minutes to get all that various stuff done, right? And we pretty much see the Katori's just like, hey, but what about all of the homework we finished during yesterday's after hours? Are we waiting till noon tomorrow to cash in that secret weapon? And she was like, honestly, I don't think we need to. Like, just go ahead and submit all of that now, since we'll probably be working overtime again tonight, right? And we see the Katori's like, oh god, I'm so happy about all of this, right? But either way, it was like, hey, like I said yesterday, today's all about the delegated assignments. Our strong homework stats leave us the chance to having second place overall, and if all goes well, maybe we can close the gap with the top squad. And we end this chapter of World Trigger with the rest of the squad pretty much being like, all right, sounds good. And that is where we end this chapter of World Trigger. And like I said earlier, this is just a really awesome chapter through and through. We just really get so much, like, small character moments going through here. I mean, like I said, we start with the chapter of the whole conversation, like, hey, Rokuro and Hanizaki are going through all of this, and Hanizaki pretty much shows his level of maturity, but we see that Rokuro is really going to be okay through all of this. And even when we see them again at the very end of the chapter, we see that Rokuro is not really dwelling on everything, that he's sort of getting back up and making sure that he is the best provisional captain he can be, which is really, really awesome. The whole insight that Hyuse has on the whole thing of like, hey, Wakamura was probably put in here to be an instructor. Really good stuff. Of course, the whole thing with all of the A rankers evaluating stuff, it is what it is. It's definitely not my favorite part of this series, because this is like a lot of characters who I personally just don't really care about saying stuff. Like, hey, it's cool to see Amo, it's cool to see Arashiyama, it's cool to see Miwa, Yonea, all of these various guys, but it really doesn't matter that too much. I also, again, did like the whole thing between Raizo and Tokiada's whole thing of like, hey, imagine as you're climbing up a mountain, and as close as you can get to being that best person is really the whole journey along the way. Really nice sentiment there. The Kodera Squad stuff is honestly okay. I like the whole thing that Kodera says of like, hey, whenever I come upon the footprints in front of me, it feels like I'm making progress myself. I like that, but I honestly wasn't the biggest fan of the rest of all that various stuff. But as normal, the whole thing of like Suwa Squad 7 being like, all right, just go and turn all the homework in now. We'll get all of that taken care of. It's just like really awesome. And then seeing Suwa being like, all right, guys, let's try to close the gap with the top spot as much as we can. And yeah, really is what it is, and hey, we're gonna have some more special battle simulations, and that's all there is to it. So, like I said, good chapter World Trigger. Definitely not one of the best we've ever had, but definitely not a terrible one either. And yeah, I really don't know how much else I've got to say on this chapter of World Trigger. Let me see how long I've been recording for at this point. I've been recording for 44 minutes. I'm probably gonna have to cut out like 3 or 4 minutes out of this, or just like me flubbing lines or all that various stuff. But yeah, mainly flubbing lines during the whole section of all the A rankers, because like, yeah, there's a lot of them, and like sometimes I said the wrong name, and I'm like, how could I possibly mistake Sayeki for like, I don't know, Kazuma or Toma or somebody? Granted, that's a terrible example because like I don't get those two confused. I guess maybe a better one's like Kaho and Maki, being like, they've got very, very similar silhouettes, but hey, either way, good chapter World Trigger, and definitely not a bad one for sure, right? Yeah, for all that out of the way, thank you guys so very much for watching this video on World Trigger chapter number 248. Hey, next time we're getting chapter number 249. And of course, I already know that the next chapter of World Trigger is out. We got one in March, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe whenever I cover that chapter, it won't be 2 months old yet. That'd be pretty neat, but like, yeah. Either way, thank you guys so much for watching this video on World Trigger. I've got plenty of other World Trigger videos on the channel. I'll have not only a post link down in the description box of this video, but also as an end card. I also cover plenty of other anime and manga related content. So like, hey, if you like some weekly Shonen Jump series, or just like a few Jump Plus series, like any of that various stuff, I may have a video on it on the channel. Right now, I'm really just trying to cover and catch up on all of the manga series I'm covering, and then we will have all the various anime review series coming back at some point, because I do enjoy watching anime and just sitting down and talking about the episodes and how it differs from the manga and all that stuff too, and not strictly talking about the original source material, even though I love talking about manga, right? Yeah, if I'm out of the way, I'll see you guys next time for World Trigger, chapter number 249. Again, this is chapter number 248, titled Rokuro Wakamura Part 4. And yeah, I'll catch you guys next time. This will be Glowplasma 231, signing out.